Hello, and welcome to the House of Kenaz. My name is Stephen Perry, and this is episode 3. And I have my little notebook here of some of the things that I want to talk about in this episode. So, I've been doing monthly episodes just in case you are new here. And so I want to first catch you up on some of the things that I've been learning and reflecting on. And then we'll go into more of the divination and predictions of things. So, first, I went to an astrology conference 2 weeks ago in Niagara Falls. And I had been wanting to go to an astrology conference for a bit. And I felt like I kind of just like manifested this. And I was listening to an astrologer that I have listened to for years, and he mentioned this conference and that he was going to be giving a few talks at it. And so I said, all right, like let's go. Let's do this. And it's great that that conference was in drivable distance, like less than 3 hours away. And so I made a weekend of it. So this is a conference that was held by Kepler College, which is an institute that has a lot of astrological education. I've taken some courses, some workshops. They have a lot of great education on their YouTube page. So I figured, okay, let's go. There's people speaking. There's a lot of topics that I know nothing about. And why not push myself ahead? So the astrologer that I was referencing, the one that had mentioned this conference is Rick Levine. And I have been listening to Rick Levine for at least 5 years. And I really admire his astrological knowledge and prowess. And I think that what's unique about Rick, and this might be too technical, but what's unique about Rick as opposed to other astrologers that I have studied under or have just, listened or watched their content is that he does pay attention to minor aspects. And so and aspects are the particular geometries or angles between two planets. And most astrologers will only look at the aspects that were, let's say, favored by Ptolemy. And those are the aspects of the opposition, so 180 degrees, the trine, like a triangle, right? So 120 degrees, a square, 90 degrees, and a sextile, so 60 degrees. Those are, and people will sometimes be iffy about the quincunx. But there's so many other aspects that can be considered. And I really like Rick in that he does try to bring that knowledge forward. And to say, okay, like maybe we should be looking at the semi-square, maybe we should be looking at the sesquiquadrate, and considering these hard aspects, especially in tight orbs. So I like that. His talk that I went to was really, it wasn't on the technical side, but it was more on the philosophy side. And there's a lot of history that I think I've been reflecting on in regards to the role of an astrologer over time. And what I mean by that is astrology as it is today is very different, even 50 years ago, 100 years ago, and certainly thousands of years ago. How so? Well, first off, it's about access, right? Kings and queen people in power, those are the ones that employed astrologers mainly to cast predictions that were centered around war and preserving their power, right? Like that was the goal of that was the mission that was placed upon astrologers is to provide accurate timing on when to do events or when, whether an event should actually be considered or not. Um, and this was the case for most of human history and astrology, right? It was about timing. Should we go to war? Should, when should we do this particular action? Um, should we have an alliance uh, with this particular country? So it's very politically minded. Um, and that things changed, I would say, in the early 1900s, around the time when psychology started becoming on board, formalized by Freud and Jung and so forth. That's where there was a turn in regards to using astrology for personal investigation rather than political prediction. I think that's really interesting to consider, and the archetypes of astrology, one of the points I feel like was discussed in the conference is like it's quite possible that astrology influenced a lot of psychology, right? I mean, like astrology has existed for thousands of years. And so the archetypes around each of the planets could have had its influence in the seedlings of modern psychology. Anyway, so that's all to say that the work that astrologers do these days, I mean, like, certainly you can find astrologers that focus on prediction and focus on timing. But there's also a very large contingent that's relatively new in this field in general, in a time space that's really devoted towards understanding the self, towards utilizing one's natal chart for self actualization, for using astrology as a tool for self acceptance. And that's certainly something that I have done, and that I continue to do, because the more I understand my chart, the more I can, the less, I'll phrase it this way, the less that I try to squeeze myself into what society wants me to be. And I'm kind of like, no, that doesn't really work for me. Like I'm not compromising like that anymore. So the conference was great. Like I met a lot of people. I felt like there was a lot of interesting ideas. One thing that I'm trying to the other bit of education, I'm trying to be like really on it with my education past really since 2024, like I've been pretty good about taking several courses a year just because I feel like I really like that structure. I really like that community, and it's important to me. And if you haven't, if you're interested in this field of metaphysics in general, I really do think that taking courses and being able to be in contact with someone who has been working in that field for decades, it's like really valuable. So, highly recommend. So, I'm taking my second course with Maria De Simone, who I mentioned in my previous episode. So I took earlier this summer a course on solar arc directions, which is more of like a predictive astrological tool. And now I'm taking a course with her, and I had my second class this morning on relationship astrology. And so that's been really fascinating. Um, I am I'm going to share with you the books that I'm reading at the moment for this course. So one book is titled Relationships and Life Cycles, and this is by Stephen Arroyo. So here, if you're looking at it through watching the video, this is what it looks like. And the other book that I'm reading is titled The Only Way to Learn About Relationships, Synastry Techniques. And this is by Marion DeMarch and Joan McEvers. And they have, I mean, both of these authors have several books. So very informative. So I'll start out with the book that's currently in my hand. And this has been really eye-opening. I've been going through this book for the past month, and it's been really interesting in that the first part of the book is trying to make a thesis about how the relationship that we have with our parents, from let's say from a psychological standpoint, we often are subconsciously playing out these dynamics and how typically, um, again, this is going to be very technical, but the ruler of our fourth house typically is like the mother figure, and the ruler of the 10th house is the father figure. And so then what they do is they basically go through every single combination that's possible astrologically and talking about different examples in um, how their parental dynamics influenced their relationship dynamics, essentially. But it's like it's really eye-opening. So that's what I'm looking at the moment because again in astrology we got these 12 houses just like we have 12 signs. And when we think about relationships, I feel like there's often a focus on just like the seventh house. And a lot of times people just think like, oh, that's the house of marriage, but it's really the house of contracts. And marriage is a form of contract. And there's other houses in the astrological chart that can lend information on, let's say, the playfulness of the person. Like, how are they going to date? Like, um, and also, the thing I've been really reflecting on lately is thinking about, okay, if the seventh house is representing like marriage or like long-term relationships, and then thinking about where the ruler of the seventh house exists, and then thinking about that link between, like in my case, the ruler of my seventh house is in my 10th house. And now, I've been thinking about this for a few weeks now, about like thinking, oh, that's why like I want to have a be in a relationship with someone who potentially is also interested on a business angle, doing things that I'm interested in doing, like building a business. Um, like those things are tied to in me. So yeah, I'm kind of working through that at the moment. And the second book that I'm reading at the moment, this Relationships and Life Cycles, this it, it's a really easy read. Like, I don't want to say easy read. It's easy on the side of astrology in that it's written in the form of conversations. And so it makes the text, like, depending on how much astrology you read, sometimes astrology is so dense that for me, like I might only be able to read like 5 or 10 pages because that's enough. Like there's like I already learned enough about after 5 or 10 pages, and I need to digest it. Um, and here I feel like I can read it and I can still like I don't feel overwhelmed. But what's interesting as I'm reflecting on this reading is reflecting on the capacity for different types of relationships, and I think that, again, coming from a societal standpoint, I think society, mainstream society, especially the media, pushes this narrative that everyone should have, a marriage and have kids and all these things, right? And again, in the early pages of this book, it's really about, okay, let's understand your chart and what are you actually wired to do? What is your capacity? What can you actually handle? Let's be realistic here. Like what's going to make you happy? Um, and so it's questioning that assumption from the first page, which again, that's why I enjoy astrology, is that it leaves the societal expectations on page one if they're doing it, in a progressive way. Now, both of these books, and especially this one by Stephen, the problem with a lot of astrological texts, especially older texts, is that they're written in such a way in either they're fatalistic, and so they say, oh, you have this aspect, you are doomed, or whatever, right? Like it's a very hard line, which is not the case. And the other thing is that they often are written in heteronormative language. And they write it as like, oh, like I'm sure that you may have seen this in some magazine, like, oh, Pisces male, a Pisces sun that's a man is like this, but a Pisces woman is like this, right? And then some of these books just get even more obtuse or more like that. They get more gendered. And I think that we exist in a different world now, thankfully. I still think that there's things to learn from these books, but I do think that the work of an astrologer in the current times is partly translational, in that taking texts that were written even as recent as 20 years ago, and text much further back, I think the job of an astrologer is translating that text and updating the interpretations to make them more progressive, to make them more inclusive. Because a lot of the times it is written man this, woman this, husband, wife. And again, you can get a sense of what they're saying, but there is a way to communicate the interpretation in a more inclusive way. So that's my feeling on a lot of astrological texts, that they are not written with inclusive language, but I don't think that they're worthless. I still think there's a lot of value in the books, but I do think it's part of my job, I think, as an astrologer to figure out ways to interpret the texts that are more inclusive. So that is what's going on with me. And again, my goal, especially over 2026, is to continue my studies and to get to the point where, I mean, I've already been studying astrology in depth for 5 years, but I want to have these focused studies with a mentor so that I can have conversations. So I think that that is a good way to learn the subject, is to have homework assignments. I like that structure. Other people don't, but like, yeah. So that's my like 2026 goals, to continue my studies, read more books. And again, she's every class giving us books that are not required for the class, but other books that she's read that might be helpful. And certainly what I did after the first class, the solar arcs class, is to continue reading books that she had suggested and just continue my education. And I think that's what's going to go forward. In addition to that, I didn't bring any other books down, but I mentioned this in episode two, that I've been doing a lot of reading on past life regression. So that's been a huge focus for me this summer. And I've been reading a lot of books lately on, from like the therapist side of past life regressions and how that's helped their patients. I just finished a book recently that was about a woman who had a past life, like she kept having memories, flashbacks of a past life. And then she had this regression. I think she went through several different regressions. And then put the pieces together of where those regressions were taking place physically, and somehow found, like through a newspaper, like found her offspring from that past life. And that family had like splintered off and were sent to orphanages. And I think a lot of the children had lost contact with each other. And so essentially, she brought them back together. Um, Even though, like, then at that point, like, she was much younger than her children because, she had been reborn. Anyway, point being is like, I'm spending a lot of time thinking about that. I am going to have a past life regression done next week. So in about 5 days. and I've been preparing for that. I have no idea what's going to what that's going to be like, but that will be episode 4. I will recap that, but it's going to be a 2 hour experience, and I've been prepping myself for that. So should be fun. Should be fun. Okay. So now I'm gonna change topic, and I want to talk a little bit about the last tarot reading that I did for the podcast. And the last reading I gave, I pulled the Tower, the Nine of Swords, and the Devil. And just so that it's clear, that reading was taken at the middle of August. So it was for the middle of August to the middle of September. A lot has happened in that last month, and in particular, we have been in America dealing with the consequences of a public shooting that has been having a snowball effect on multiple parts of society. It's a very much a tower moment in a way, right? Like the things are changing. It's also a Nine of Swords moment in that the Nine of Swords is this card, let me see if I can find it, in which there are swords that are dripping blood, and it is representing cruelty. Here we go. So there's been a lot of harsh words, especially on the internet. People are losing their job. Things are happening. So, when I initially gave that reading, I gave it a very general, like, oh, like when bad things happen, you have to be kind of selective with the words that you choose. And I still think that holds true because now people are losing their jobs because of the words that they choose. I also pulled the devil, which is, in this deck around manifestation. And again, we are at this juncture of like, what are we willing to put up with? Like, and what do we actually want? Like, what is the future that we want? How do we want to bring that forward? So that's all to say. I really think that reading, when I gave my interpretation, it was more about like, what can you do, right? And the tower is it's representing something that is kind of out of our control. It's going to happen, like inevitably. What's in our control is how we react to it. The other thing that I want to mention, so I give myself tarot readings. Um, Usually about every 2 to 3 months, I'll give myself a Celtic cross. And I have this book, and I have another book upstairs, but because I filled it. Um, this book starts in 2022, and I essentially just list all the cards, and I then provide like an interpretation of what I believe that will represent. Um, and then when I'm on top of things, I will go back and I'll write like, okay, this is what actually happened. So I say that all because I think that it's important if you yourself are using some sort of divinatory practice, or if you are making predictions. I think having something where you write those predictions, or they are there so you can go back and kind of understand, um, kind of how good were you at deciphering these cards. Where was your prediction? Where'd you land? What was reality? How did you experience it? I think that's all part of the learning process. And I think that's something that often is missing in a lot of the work that I see online. I think a lot of times it's only forward focus and there's not enough internal reflection of understanding, like, oh, I got this card. This is what I thought it meant. And then kind of recognizing your biases, or, you know, how that card also could represent an additional energy that maybe you're less familiar with. That's all to say that this year in particular, I'm going to give you a little bit of personal information. I I've been really, every time I give myself a reading, I shouldn't say every time. The last few times that I give myself a reading, I am getting the death card. And it's really fascinating when you track how certain cards move through a Celtic spread, for instance, because like when you're doing a Celtic cross spread, every position represents something. That having a card in the sixth position is different than in the seventh position, right? They have, and every book, every resource is going to have a different interpretation, but like when you pull the cards, you have an intention of like, this is what that position represents. Um, anyway, so it's been really interesting because the death card in the previous time I did the reading, so on June 23rd of this year, death was in my short-term future. It was in the seventh position, what I call my seventh position. So that was suggesting like, yeah, like from basically June until the reading that I gave myself a few weeks ago. I guess it was, yeah, a week and a half ago, September. Having death in that position kind of represented uh, that I was going through transformation, which is, this whole summer has been a shift internally. And it's still difficult for me to put it in words, but hey, this podcast exists in part because of that energy. It is about me being more conscious about the energy I'm putting out and how I want to spend my energy. And also really asking myself the hard question of, is this really what you want to do? Like, what do you want to be here? Like, asking myself, like, what would make you happy? Rather than just having the easy answer of like, oh, I'm going to just do this thing because this is what I've always done. Really ask myself what it is that I want. That's kind of hard. So it's really interesting that now death, which I previously had as my short-term card, it is now my identity card. So it's now in position one in this current reading. So I have become death. I have become transformation. I am embodying that. So my short term future, like it's kind of like representing the fact that I'm in now, like in that period of death, that this projection of being in that, having death in my short-term future, now it is that short-term future is now the present, right? Like that is what I am. So I think that that's really interesting. The other card that I have gotten the last three readings I've given myself is oppression, the 10 of Wands. And that's been really interesting there. So in the end of April, again, it was my short-term future. So it's in my seventh position. And then in June, when death was my short-term future, oppression became my hopes and fears. So it was all about how I'm hoping essentially that I can do all the things that I am dreaming of, that, because I have so many different, I don't know the expression, but like rods in the fire. Like I have a lot of things going on at the time. I am juggling a lot of things. And I'm kind of bored when I'm not. Like I like having a lot of projects, but then I had to remind myself that I'm doing this to myself. There are times when I feel stressed out. Um, and it's like I've given myself all these tasks. So I have to ask myself, like, uh, what is it that again, what is it that you really want? Anyway, so that 10 of Wands now has moved to the 11th position, which is my outcome or like long-term future. So I'm, interpreting that as that I am going to continue doing all the different things, but perhaps being mindful, with the death in mind, kind of transforming the power to transform how I do that. But yeah, I find that interesting. Again, death and this kind of wants this oppression, or kind of just being overwhelmed by a lot of things. Those have been my two cards of the year. Like those are the things that are going on. And I think that that kind of sums up my 2025 of, I feel like there's a lot of change going on internally for me. There's a lot of things that are happening, and I'm doing a lot of things. Yeah, I'm just so internally and externally. And at least for me, it's often easier for me to describe what is going on when I have more distance from it. Obviously, what's going on for me is grief and dealing with a lot of people who have passed away in my life, and having to uh, deal with mortality, and thinking about how I want to spend the remaining time that I have on this earth. Because listen, it's all finite for all of us. There's no way out of this. There's no infinite life. And so it's really, I've been struggling with this really all my life, but the past year has brought this to a level, um is, yeah, what do I, given the amount of time that's left in my life, which I don't know how long it is, what do I actually want to do with that time? That's the thing. That's what I'm really struggling with. With that all being said, again, I'm filming this or recording this on September 20th at night. So it's a little past 10 o'clock. And I want to share with you what's going on astrologically before I end the episode with a tarot reading. So I'm going to just show you my Astro Gold. And what I have up here is the chart for tomorrow. This is September 21st, about 3:54 p.m. Eastern time, so around 4 p.m. Eastern time. This is when the new moon happens, but the new moon is also this time a solar eclipse. And the reason why it's a new moon, here's your uh, astrological lesson. The reason why it's a new moon is that the moon and the sun are at the same degree. So they're at 29 degrees and 5 minutes of Virgo. Okay. The reason why it's a solar eclipse is that these points, 29 degrees, let's say, you look at the distance between that and the closest node. So here we have the south node. And when we have a new moon that's happening, that is less than 15 degrees from the south node. So this distance, 18 degrees to 29 degrees, that's about 11 degrees, right? 11 is less than 15. That's what makes it a solar eclipse. So that's how we know that's a solar eclipse. Now, what's interesting about the solar eclipse is its relationship to Neptune. I mean, not Neptune, well, a little bit of Neptune, but Saturn. Saturn is at 28 degrees of Pisces. And maybe I'll make this a little bit more explicit here. So we have that. What that means is essentially it's it's going to be nearly perfectly opposite Saturn. Saturn is all about authority. It's about structure. One way that I see this is that for this new moon, which is about like new beginnings, right? Like new moons are times that indicate planting seeds, right? This is the time in which, because Saturn is opposite that new moon, there is authority that is perhaps opposing the this whatever inception that you have. There is some kind of aggressive feeling, aggressive nature in the mix here. Another way that you could think about that, so that Saturn could represent a person, a country, a figure. Another viewpoint of that is sure, maybe that's true. What, like, how can you yourself, if you think about the things that you want to bring in this world, write some lists. Like, let's think about this from a detailed aspect. How can you utilize the energy of Saturn to not be buried by the forces of oppression, but to still thrive in spite of oppression? So I think that that's like one way to kind of put this on its head. Anyway, I think it could be my prediction that this coming week is going to be very tense. I think why? I think that Saturn, given the political landscape and everything that's going on, I think that that Saturn could, um, again, it's kind of like putting a thumb down on, I want to say this, like you're putting pressure on something that already has a lot of pressure. Now, why I think this week is going to be difficult is I think that new moon kind of it is a little bit difficult with that Saturn. But what I do think is really fascinating is the next day. So on Monday, we have that Mars will change sign. So it will be then on Monday in Scorpio. And what I'm keeping my eye out for is then you can see that Mars is squaring Pluto. And maybe it's easier for us to see it here that we got this little square on Monday. It's 1 degree, about 1 degree apart. On Tuesday, it's only about 27 minutes apart at the time that I'm looking at. And then already on Wednesday, it's passing that apex point of perfection. And simultaneously, what is going on there is if you think about Scorpio, I'm going to think about numbers. Scorpio is the eighth sign in astrology. And Aries is the first sign, right? And you think about this as a clock. Eight, if it's 8 a.m., right? And you're meeting someone in 5 hours, then that's 1 p.m., right? So what I'm trying to say is five signs ahead of Scorpio. So you got Sagittarius, you got Capricorn, Aquarius, Pisces, Aries. Five signs is a quincunx. So what we can see is that Mars is going to be in a quincunx with Neptune and Uranus. So this 0 degree mark of Scorpio is kind of right now like a very contentious point in astrology. 0, 1 degree, around there. It's very contentious because you can see, maybe I can make this clearer. Let me just remove all of the aspects except the square and the quincunx. Okay. So then now you can see that if you look at Mars, again, that's the little circle with an arrow. Now you can see that 5 degrees in one direction gives us Gemini from 5 degrees from Scorpio, five signs from Scorpio. In one direction gives us Aries, in the other direction gives us Gemini. And we're at this point where both Neptune and Uranus are at the beginning of those respective signs. So the 0 degree and 1 degree of Scorpio is at this very contentious point. On top of that, you got Pluto also at 1 degree of Aquarius, which is again three signs from Scorpio. And whenever Mars is in a hard aspect to Pluto, there's always violence. Like that's when Luigi happened. That's when the car on fire in Las Vegas happened, like on January 1st or 2nd or whatever. Like there's always news that happens when Mars and Pluto are in hard aspects. And I think having Uranus in a quincunx, having Neptune in a quincunx, so you're at that yod point. It's essentially at a yod, the point of the yod. I would be surprised if there's not national news or international news that is um, violent. I would be surprised if that doesn't happen. It just, and you got the sun changing signs as well. There's a shift. There's a shift. The new moon happens, and then again, because the new moon is happening at 29 degrees of Virgo. Okay. And then let's get exact here. When does the sun change signs? The sun changes into Libra around 3 p.m. on Monday. That's also, around that time when Mars changes signs into Scorpio. So you got two planets changing signs. And there's usually something, that happens. That's my guess. I feel like there's going to be an energy shift. I feel like Mars being in that hard aspect to Pluto. I feel like my guess is with the new moon and that opposition with Saturn, there's going to be more tension, like political tension. And then Mars is going to incite things. Like Mars is the thing about like how we move and how we do things in the world. It is our ego. And I think that this is going to be a time when there's just a lot of tension, and maybe someone reacts from this feeling of tension and does something harmful. So use that information however you want. I feel like be on your be cautious of when you are out amongst crowds. Um, yeah, because people are on edge. You don't know what's going to set people off. Um, Not everyone is listening to astrology podcasts, so you don't know how they're going to be triggered. And yeah, just be careful. Okay, so that is my thought. I have to say I have not spent a lot of time looking at October. Um, so can't really say if there's any particular dates in mind. But again, whenever a planet this year, this isn't always, right? Really, this year at the moment, whenever a planet is going to hit that 0 degree and 1 degree mark of Scorpio, I think that there's potential of some big news, right? So, like here, for instance, October 6th, we have Mercury moving into Scorpio. And again, it's in that configuration where it's at that point of a yod. So it's at a quincunx with Neptune and with Uranus. And then it's also at a square with Pluto here. So I think that that's something just to think about. Maybe like October 6th and 7th might be um, a particularly contentious time. I want to put some of the aspects back. Yeah, and then the sun will be at that point. So, okay, so by the time the sun reaches that 0 degree point, it's kind of it's like an out of sign now configuration, so it's probably less powerful. And what I mean by that is by that point, Neptune has already moved back into Pisces. And it does that like 2 days before the sun um moves into Scorpio. So the reason why I'm saying it's out of sign is like the sun is in Scorpio, Neptune is in Pisces. That is really that's a trine by sign just because they're both water elements, they're water signs. So like mathematically, sure, because one is at the end of one sign and one is at the beginning of one sign, they are within a margin of error at 150 degrees apart. Um, so that part of the quincunx is like weaker, but it's still at a square with Pluto. And it's also still at a quincunx with Uranus. So I still think that, the sun, again, whenever it's at a hard aspect with Pluto, that's usually a news day. So I'm going to say that there could be something unexpected given Uranus at that quincunx, and then something with Pluto that's like triggering someone to um, again, Pluto's about our trauma and our trauma pattern, and a lot of us are living still operating under childhood trauma patterns. And when they get activated, if you don't, if you're not doing the work to overcome them, it's not it's not a pretty sight. Anyway, so if I have to give predictions for October, dates to keep in mind, again, I'm gonna say October 6th and 7th, and then the end of October. So October 23rd, 24th, 25th. Yeah, those those are dates to keep in mind. What's kind of yeah, what's kind of interesting is the next new moon again is going to happen at the end of the sign. But we'll talk about that next time. I feel like I'm going too far in the future. Um, yeah, I don't even know how long I have been speaking, but we're gonna end this with a tarot reading. And again, I have been posting some things on social media. So I have an Instagram account. I do have a TikTok account. I'm posting occasionally, again, like a few times a month. Sometimes I'm posting like random things like, oh, I did a random draw, I did a biblio reading. It's whenever I feel the urge to. But if you can follow me there, feel free to reach out. And if you have any comments on this podcast, feel free to post them on Spotify. Let's see. So I want to give a reading. We are at September 20th. So for the next month, September 20th to let's say mid-October. Um, Thinking about three cards. I'm not assigning any position meaning. They are just going to be three cards that give us guidance on the situation in the next month and how to proceed. Right. Felt like four, so that's what it holds. And I've been doing these runes lately, so I'm gonna keep with that tradition just so that I continue learning the runes. Okay. I already forget the order that I pull these cards. So I'm gonna just go through them. So the first one that we got is the Virtue card. This is the Three of Wands. It is a Sun in Aries card. So this is a card of spring, of the future, of blossoming, of there's something like courageous about this card. Again, virtue. Interesting. So now we have the Seven of Wands. I think this is very similar. This is valor. And this is a Mars in Leo card. And that's a very like bravery kind of energy, like that's a very leadership type of energy. Okay, so then the next card, and like this is kind of crazy. We're getting the Two of Wands. This is Dominion. This is a Mars in Aries card, and Mars is the ruler of Aries. So this is a very Mars card. Um, this is, I mean, like what this card kind of makes me so like the Two of Wands is often about like planning things. A choice of what direction do we want to go in? And then the I don't know why this is coming to me, but when I think about this card and I think about Mars, to me, these almost look like missiles. And this is making me think about like, are we sending missiles somewhere? Like, this is a very like war card. Like all of these cards, I mean, like they're good cards. Don't don't kid me, but like they are also, I don't say this. They are cards that would be great for a war machine. Okay, and then we have the Prince of Cups. We got all this fire, and now we have the Prince of Cups. The thing that's popping out to me in this card is that in the Prince of Cups, in what's coming out of the cup is a snake. And snakes are a symbol of transformation. Why? Because snakes shed skin. And when they shed skin, that's the physical manifestation of their transformation, right? They've gotten bigger. So, this is something in which cups being a water sign and being about emotions. There's something here about uh trying, again, it's a prince. So I feel like there's part of like being on the journey of transforming yourself to navigate and not be uh overcome or succumb by your emotions. Like you don't want to be buried under the weight of your emotions. And there's something about this card about like being on that journey of like trying to overcome. Now, I don't want to say overcome because you don't want to like not have emotions. I don't think that's healthy. But you want to recognize your emotions and feel your emotions and let them like pass through you. And so I feel like this is a card of going through that. Yeah. Then we have this last rune, and again, I'm in the process of studying these runes. So you have to bear with me. Okay, so this is the card that's called Anzus. Its symbolism is breath, speech, communication, chanting, and language. I'm going to read just a little bit of this. Like words riding on the wind, finding homes in our pages, and Zeus is the rune of language in its many forms. In the story of the runes, Therisis brought chaotic power and the boundary between humans and the cosmic forces. And Zeus creates order from that chaos and power. We find individuation within this rune. The undefined forces that come before Anzus are now finding words, expression, and identity. We meet Zeus in our own lives when we give voice to our feelings. So I think that that's like kind of enough, and that this card is kind of representing, something that I am going through where you're taking something that's kind of nebulous, very like Neptunian, and giving it structure, Saturn, right? Like putting words to it. There is something about like, yeah, being transdimensional, and then boiling it down into something that is into words, into something that is a little bit more reality based. Anyway, so there's like the I don't know, like the thing that I keep getting from these cards, it just feels like war to me. Like it just feels like the trumpets of war of men, like those images of like men walking, at the beginning of World War II, when they're all kind of like marching in their home cities, leaving for the war front. There are, these symbols of virtue and valor. Like you can hear the trumpets playing, and this idea of dominion. I don't think that these are bad cards, but I just feel like that's the that's the thing that keeps popping up in my mind. Now, maybe that's not the case. Maybe it's not like physical war, but maybe another way that this kind of manifests is that people find their voice, right? Like we find our voice. We don't get overwhelmed by all the messaging, all the things, and we don't get, we're able to kind of control our emotions. Okay, this is a little appendix to the reading, especially because I just felt kind of tired at the end when I was thinking about interpretations. So I have spent some time today reflecting more on these cards. And again, I still feel like there's a war energy, but I want to go over better how I'm viewing these cards. So this first card, this virtue card, the sun in Aries, right? So the sun in Aries is the spring. And when we're in the spring, at least, here in the northern hemisphere, spring happens in Aries season. We have these flowers that are blooming. And you can think about these flowers as like mind, body, spirits, right? And there's a union there. They are in alignment there. And I think to act with virtue is to act in a way that is in alignment with all your different parts. So I think that's important there. This next card is the Valor card. This is a 7 in Wands card. And when you think about Valor, you think about courage, having the courage to go forward with something. This is a Mars in Leo card. So again, it's a very showy card. It's a very again, there's a lot of energy here. I think that both of these cards are basically asking you to act courageous with integrity, with alignment. And then this third card, this Mars in Aries card, the Two of Wands, this Dominion card. This is about like, in one way, you could think about this as control, internal control, like whether you have the control or not to like launch the warheads, right? Do you have control over your own domain. One other thing that I think is interesting that I didn't really pick up on the first time when I was reading this book, um, Tarot, the Mirror of the Soul, and which is about this deck. He talks about how this image is, if you can see it, it's a combination of water and fire. So this bluish, the water, and then, of course, it being in Aries is a fire sign, wands are fire, right? So there is something here also about this union of emotional versus spirit or action, which is further, I think, compounded by this Prince of Cups, because the Prince of Cups is about emotion. Cups are about emotions, and this is about controlling our emotions, and that snake is about transforming ourselves in such a way that we are not overcome by emotions, but that we are able to regulate our emotions. So, like from an individual standpoint, I do think that these cards are quite powerful in that they are all suggesting signs of how to grow in a positive way during the next month. Things to think about in ways that you want to develop. And again, this card, this rune that we have here is about communication. So perhaps communication is key because bringing our thoughts into words, right? Like that process of manifesting and like distilling something that's like multidimensional into words, that also is something that kind of one, takes alignment to be able to do that, takes courage. So that is also something to think about, or like what are your thoughts? What's running through your mind? What are you saying out loud? Is that who you want to be? I think these cards about how you want to act courageously and with integrity, often we think about that through like physical actions, but this rune makes me think that we should also be mindful about the words that we are using and making sure that the words that we choose are exactly what we want, how we want to put our best self forward. Now, from a global standpoint, like again, the interpretation of the cards depends on the context. And so similar to the last reading that I gave in episode 2, where we had the tower card, again, the tower represents something that we can't control. All we can control is how we react. Is similar here. Like these cards could be pointing to something where, again, going back to propaganda, these are fantastic cards for a propaganda machine to stir up support for a cause, right? Um, so this could be used. I guess the point I'm trying to say is this energy could be used nefariously, right? It could be used in that context, and I think the job of us is to think about the long-term goal. What are we working towards? And I think that's how you determine whether you are acting in alignment with your goals or the greater good, or whether things are being obfuscated. And if that's the case, are you really acting with virtue? Right? I think that's something key to think about. So anyway, those are my additional thoughts on this. So I wanted to include that just because last night I hit a wall and I felt like I needed to sleep on it and think more about this. Anyway, thank you for joining me. If you've made it this far. I really appreciate it because I have no idea if anyone is listening to this. So if you are, subscribe and say hi.